The folder landed on the conference table with barely a sound. Thin. Maybe 6 pages total. Melissa Chen from HR kept her hands folded, eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder. Harlan, your position is being eliminated effective immediately. The words came out rehearsed, flat. I opened my mouth, but she continued without pause. We've restructured operations to align with current strategic priorities. Your role no longer fits our organizational model. I reached for the folder. My access card sat beside it, already deactivated. The little green light I'd seen for 31 years was now dark plastic. Security stood by the door. 2 guards I'd never seen before, young enough to be my kids. You'll need to collect personal items under supervision, Melissa continued. IT will wipe your accounts within the hour. 31 years. 11,000 mornings walking through those doors. And now 2 strangers would watch me pack a box. My manager, Dixon Pierce, sat 3 seats away, pen tapping against his notepad. He wouldn't look up. Wouldn't meet my eyes. I stood slowly, legs stiff from the shock. Understood, I said quietly. The security guards stepped forward. The walk through operations felt endless. Desks I'd helped arrange. Computers running systems I'd built. People I'd trained, mentored, promoted. Heads stayed down. Keyboards clicked. Someone coughed. Not one person looked up as I passed. Amanda, who I'd trained personally when she started fresh out of college 8 years ago, studied her screen like it held state secrets. Troy, who'd called me last month panicking about a system failure I'd fixed in 20 minutes, suddenly needed coffee. The silence wasn't neutral. It was intentional. They'd been told. Warned, probably. Don't engage. Don't ask questions. Pretend the man who taught you everything is already gone. Security led me to my office, a small space tucked behind the main floor. 31 years, and I'd never wanted the big corner office. I preferred being close to the work. Photos of my wife, my grandkids. A coffee mug from the company's 25th anniversary. A plaque nobody remembered giving me. I filled the cardboard box slowly, deliberately. The guards watched without speaking. When I finished, they walked me to the exit. No goodbye. No handshake. Just silence. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, engine off, box on the passenger seat. The parking lot stretched out around me, half empty in the mid-afternoon light. Spots I'd parked in for 3 decades. Different trucks, same routine. Clock in early. Stay late. Fix what broke. The company I'd helped build through 2 recessions, for leadership changes, and countless crises had just erased me in under 10 minutes. No ceremony. No acknowledgement. Just a thin folder and a dead access card. My phone buzzed. Text from my wife, Caroline. How'd the meeting go? She didn't know it was a termination meeting. I'd thought it was a project review. I stared at the message, unsure how to answer. Replaced. That was the word that kept surfacing. Not fired for cause. Not laid off in a downsizing. Replaced. Like outdated equipment. I started the engine and pulled out slowly, watching Meridian Industries disappear in my rearview mirror. The anger hadn't hit yet. Just a hollow confusion, like waking up in the wrong house. 31 years, and they couldn't give me 10 minutes of honesty. 1993. I was 26, newly married, and Meridian Industries was a regional logistics company barely holding together. The main distribution system crashed 3 weeks into my employment. Orders backed up. Clients threatened to leave. Management panicked. I stayed until 2 in the morning, 7 nights straight, rebuilding routing protocols nobody else understood. The head of operations back then, Victor Hayes, found me asleep at my desk one morning. Instead of reprimanding me, he sat down and asked what I needed. Better documentation and 2 more people who actually want to learn, I'd said. He gave me both. We saved the company that month. Orders resumed. Clients stayed. Meridian grew. Victor retired 8 years later and told me privately, "You're the reason we survived." I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because someone had to. Because walking away when things broke wasn't in my nature. That pattern repeated for 3 decades. Systems failed. I fixed them. Quietly. Thoroughly. Without asking for spotlights. Now, sitting in my truck with a cardboard box, I wondered if that quiet competence had made me invisible. Easy to dismiss. Easy to replace. Because nobody upstairs remembered what it looked like when things actually fell apart. The shift started about 4 years ago. Subtle at first. I'd present a solution in a meeting, and Dixon would nod, take notes. 2 weeks later, he'd present the same solution to leadership, calling it his optimization initiative. My name never appeared. I told myself it didn't matter. Results mattered. Then my project proposals started sitting in Dixon's inbox for weeks before being implemented without discussion. Modified slightly. Presented upward as his ideas. In leadership meetings, I'd start explaining a system issue, and Dixon would interrupt, finishing my thought as if he'd originated it. Exactly what I've been saying, he'd add. Colleagues noticed but said nothing. When I mentioned it to Caroline, she said, "Document everything. Something feels wrong." I should have listened harder. Younger managers started getting promoted around me. People I'd trained. They'd present work that built directly on my foundations, and leadership would praise their innovation. My role grew quieter. Smaller. I was still carrying the heaviest technical load, but my visibility shrank. Last year, a consultant named Derek appeared. Spent 6 months shadowing me. Asked surface questions. Never dug deep into why systems worked, only how fast they ran. I thought he was learning. Turns out, he was replacing me. 2 days after my termination, I learned Derek had been given my title, my responsibilities, and my office. No transition period. No knowledge transfer. Just immediate replacement. Amanda called me from her personal phone, voice tight. They're pretending Derek knows everything you knew. He doesn't. He keeps asking us questions we don't have answers to. I asked what Dixon said. Dixon told us to figure it out. That Derek has fresh perspective and we should trust the process. Fresh perspective. Like 31 years of institutional knowledge could be replaced by 6 months of surface observation. Derek had never stayed late debugging a failing system. Never traced a problem through 4 interconnected subsystems to find the root cause. Never rebuilt protocols from scratch when documentation failed. He'd watched me work and assumed competence was simple. But competence at scale, built over decades, isn't simple. It's thousands of small decisions, workarounds, and safeguards that exist because of problems nobody remembers. Derek didn't know what he didn't know. And leadership didn't care. They'd cut salary, hired cheaper, and assumed nothing would break. I hung up with Amanda and stared at the severance folder still sitting on my kitchen table. Maybe it was time to actually read it carefully. HR called the next morning. Same flat tone. Harlan, we're finalizing your exit documentation. The settlement package is standard. 4-week severance, continuation of benefits through the end of the month, and a non-disparagement agreement. I listened without interrupting. We'll need your signature by end of week to process final payment. The terms are non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. A phrase meant to discourage questions. I asked, "Can you email me the complete document?" "It's the same one we gave you in the meeting." "I'd like the full version. Every clause." A pause. "Of course. I'll send it within the hour." The tone had shifted slightly. Less certainty. More caution. When the email arrived, I printed all 14 pages. The meeting folder had been summarized. The full document was different. Denser. I read it twice, slowly, marking sections that stood out. Page 9, subsection 4, caught my attention. A clause about institutional knowledge transfer and system certification. Words I recognized because I'd helped draft similar language 7 years ago during a compliance review. I leaned back, mind turning. Then I called my lawyer. Bernard sat across from me in his office, reading glasses perched on his nose, going through the settlement page by page. He'd handled my estate planning for years, but employment law wasn't his specialty. Still, he knew how to read contracts. He stopped on page 9. Read it again. Looked up at me. Did you write this clause? Parts of it. Years ago. Leadership wanted protections around critical operational knowledge. Do they understand what it obligates them to prove? I shook my head. Probably not. It was buried in compliance documentation. Nobody reads those thoroughly. Bernard tapped the page. This says your exit can't be finalized until full certification of legacy systems is completed and documented. That certification requires your formal sign-off as the departing institutional expert. He looked at me seriously. Harlan, if these systems aren't fully documented elsewhere, and you're the only one who understands them completely, they can't process your exit without your cooperation. The room went quiet. I thought about Derek asking surface questions. About Dixon avoiding my calls. About 31 years of safeguards, workarounds, and fixes nobody else had tracked. What happens if I don't cooperate? I asked. Bernard smiled slightly. Then they're in breach of their own settlement terms. And you're still technically employed until compliance is met. I didn't call HR immediately. I waited 2 days. Let them think I was processing quietly. When I finally responded, I kept my tone neutral. Professional. I've reviewed the settlement with legal counsel. I'm prepared to accept conditionally, pending completion of the institutional knowledge transfer requirements outlined in Section 4. Silence on the other end. Then Melissa's voice. Careful now. That section is standard language. We don't typically enforce it for operational exits. It's in the contract, I replied simply. I'd like to fulfill my obligations properly. I'll need a formal transition schedule to document all legacy systems per the certification requirements. Another pause. Let me consult with leadership and get back to you. She hung up quickly. Too quickly. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Email from Dixon. Subject. Transition discussion. Harlan, let's talk about reasonable timelines for knowledge transfer. When are you available? I stared at the message. Dixon hadn't spoken to me during my termination. Hadn't returned my calls after. Now he wanted to talk about reasonable timelines. I replied simply. I'm available once we formalize the transition schedule per contract terms. My attorney can coordinate. I didn't add emotion. Didn't threaten. Just process. The way they'd treated me. The reply came back within minutes. Understood. We'll be in touch. The power dynamic had shifted, and we both knew it. The next week, emails multiplied. Dixon looped in senior operations leadership. Melissa added legal counsel. Someone from IT wanted system documentation I'd supposedly created. Meetings appeared on calendars marked urgent. Participants I'd never worked with directly. I watched from outside, no longer employed but somehow still central. My phone rang constantly. I let most calls go to voicemail. When I did answer, I kept responses brief. I'll need that request in writing. My attorney is coordinating transition protocols. The contract specifies certification requirements. I'm following the process. Each response was calm, factual, non-emotional. The same tone they'd used when erasing 31 years in 10 minutes. Caroline watched me carefully over dinner one night. You're not angry anymore. No, I admitted. I'm methodical. She smiled. That's worse for them. She was right. Anger burns hot and fast. Methodical is patient. Thorough. And right now, Meridian Industries was realizing that the institutional knowledge they'd dismissed so easily wasn't replaceable by a consultant who'd spent 6 months taking notes. Systems I'd built, maintained, and safeguarded for decades didn't come with instruction manuals. They came with experience. And experience was about to cost them significantly more than 4-week severance. The first system issue appeared 12 days after my termination. A regional distribution hub in Tennessee reported routing delays. Small at first. Orders processing slower than normal. Derek apparently ran diagnostics, found nothing obvious, and told them to monitor it. The delays got worse. Then the Michigan facility reported similar problems. Different system, same symptoms. Sluggish processing, unexplained bottlenecks. I heard about it through Amanda, who texted me in frustration. Everything's breaking and nobody knows why. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew exactly why. Both systems relied on background optimization protocols I'd implemented years ago. They ran quietly, invisible to standard diagnostics, rebalancing loads and preventing bottlenecks before they formed. Derek didn't know they existed because they'd never appeared in his shadowing notes. He'd only seen the surface. The protocols required manual certification every 90 days. A simple process that took me 15 minutes. I'd done it so routinely, nobody noticed. My last certification had been 73 days before my termination. The systems were failing because nobody had recertified them. And nobody knew recertification was necessary. Meridian's operations were cracking, and Derek was frantically diagnosing symptoms without understanding the disease. I sat at home, knowing exactly what would happen next. Dixon called on a Friday afternoon. His voice had lost its professional distance. "Harlan, we need your help. Systems are experiencing performance issues, and we're trying to understand what's changed." I kept my tone even. "I'm no longer on payroll, Dixon. I understand, but you built these systems. You know them better than anyone." "I did," I agreed. "And the settlement contract requires full knowledge transfer and certification. We haven't completed that process." He cleared his throat. "We're working on scheduling. In the meantime, could you consult on these specific issues? We'd compensate you. Through the formal transition process, yes. Once that's documented and approved." "That could take weeks," Dixon said, frustration creeping in. "We need answers now." "Then you should have started the transition process when I requested it 12 days ago." Silence. Then quieter. "What do you need from us?" I'd been waiting for that question. "A formal transition schedule. Access to submit proper documentation. And acknowledgement that my exit can't be finalized until certification is complete per contract terms." He agreed immediately. Too quickly. Desperation was setting in. "I'll have legal send updated terms today." When we hung up, I realized something had fundamentally changed. They'd pushed me out with confidence. Now they were asking me back with panic. The updated terms arrived within hours. Legal counsel's name at the bottom. Language suddenly flexible. They wanted me on-site 3 days a week for transition consultation. Compensation at my previous rate. Immediate start date requested. I forwarded it to Bernard. He called back laughing. "They're terrified. This reads like a job offer disguised as an exit agreement." "What do I do?" I asked. "You negotiate," he said simply. "They need you more than you need them." That night, I drafted my response. Professional. Thorough. I'd accept the transition consultation role, but only under specific conditions. Full access restoration to all systems I'd built. Formal documentation time, not rushed knowledge dumps. A detailed schedule outlining which systems required certification and how long each would take properly. And compensation reflecting consultant rates, not employee salary. I sent it Saturday morning and waited. By Monday, 3 executives had called. By Tuesday, Melissa from HR sounded exhausted. "We're reviewing your terms. Leadership is meeting this afternoon." "Take your time," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." That was the truth. I wasn't going anywhere. But their operations were falling apart while they decided whether to meet my conditions. Every day they delayed was another day systems degraded. Another day clients noticed. Another day their mistake became more expensive. The meetings started appearing on my personal email. Executives I'd never reported to suddenly wanted 15 minutes. Senior leadership asking if I could briefly consult on specific operational questions. Each request was urgent. Each one revealed how little they understood about the infrastructure I'd built. One VP asked about failover protocols for the main distribution network. I explained briefly that it required 3-layer certification I'd handled manually. Can Derek do that? He asked. If he knows the protocols exist, studies the documentation, and gets certified on the process, yes. How long would that take? 4 months minimum. Assuming the documentation is current. It wasn't. I'd updated it personally every quarter, but those updates lived in systems they'd locked me out of. Another executive asked about client-facing processing speed. I walked him through optimization sequences that ran in background. We don't see those in our current diagnostics, he said. You wouldn't, I replied. They're designed to be invisible when working properly. The questions kept coming, each one exposing gaps. Each answer revealing how deeply embedded my knowledge was in their daily operations. They'd assumed institutional knowledge was transferable through observation. They were learning it required decades of experience, documented properly, with time nobody had given me. Dixon called again, this time on a weekend. Harlan, I need to ask you something directly. I waited. When you built these systems, did you document everything? The question hung there, loaded with implications. I documented everything leadership funded time for, I said carefully. Some systems evolved faster than documentation budgets. I flagged that multiple times. Do you have those flags in writing? Yes. Another pause. We can't find complete documentation for several critical systems. Derek's struggling because the manuals don't match current operations. That's because operations evolved over 15 years. I maintained living documentation, but it required quarterly updates. Those updates stopped when I was terminated. I heard him exhale slowly. So the documentation Derek is following is outdated. Significantly. And the current state of these systems exists where? In my work files. On systems you locked me out of 17 days ago. The silence stretched longer this time. Dixon was realizing what Bernard had spotted immediately. They couldn't finalize my exit without my certification. They couldn't get my certification without access I no longer had. And they couldn't restore that access without admitting they'd made a catastrophic mistake. We need to bring you back, Dixon said finally. Not as a consultant. Fully. With proper authority. We'll see, I replied and hung up. Legal reached out directly Tuesday morning. Not HR. Not Dixon. The company's senior legal counsel, a woman named Patricia I'd met exactly twice in 31 years. Mr. Whitcomb, I've been asked to facilitate resolution of your transition agreement. We'd like to discuss terms that work for everyone. Translation. They were panicking. I'm available to discuss, I said. What are you proposing? Full reinstatement to your previous position, back pay from termination date, and a formal apology for the procedural errors in your exit. Procedural errors. Not wrongful termination. Not catastrophic mismanagement. Errors. And the knowledge transfer requirements? I asked. We'd work with you on a reasonable timeline. The contract specifies full certification. That's not negotiable. She paused. We understand. We'd provide whatever resources you need. Then put it in writing. Reinstatement terms, compensation adjustment, and a formal transition timeline I approve. Once that's documented, we can move forward. She agreed quickly. Too quickly. Within 3 hours, a revised offer arrived. Better than I'd expected. Reinstatement with title upgrade. Compensation increase. Back pay. Extended benefits. And a transition timeline structured around my availability. I read it twice, then called Bernard. They're desperate, he said after reviewing. But this is incomplete. How? It doesn't address why you were terminated or acknowledge the damage. You have leverage. Use it. I let the offer sit for 48 hours. Didn't respond. Didn't acknowledge. Just silence. During that time, clients started getting restless. Amanda texted me that 2 major accounts had complained about service degradation. Derek had been pulled into emergency meetings. Dixon was working 16-hour days trying to contain the crisis. Meridian's operations were cracking visibly now, and industry contacts were noticing. A former colleague who'd moved to a competitor called me directly. "What's happening over there?" "We're hearing chaos." "Leadership changes," I said simply. "Changes that are costing them clients." By Friday, Patricia called again. "Harlan, we haven't heard back on our offer. Is there an issue?" "I'm reviewing it thoroughly," I said. "There are elements that need clarification." "Such as?" "Accountability. The offer reinstates me and adjusts compensation, but it doesn't address why I was terminated improperly or what safeguards prevent it happening again." She went quiet. "What are you asking for?" "Acknowledgement. In writing. That the termination was unjustified and resulted from failure to recognize institutional value. And structural changes ensuring knowledge retention is prioritized going forward." "That's beyond my authority," she admitted. "Then find someone with authority," I replied calmly, "because without that accountability, we're just repeating mistakes." She promised to escalate. I hung up and waited. The cracks were spreading. Now it was just a question of how much damage they'd accept before admitting the truth. The call came Monday morning from someone I'd never spoken to directly. Board member. One of the executives 3 levels above Dixon. His voice was measured, careful. "Mr. Whitcomb, I've been briefed on the situation. I want to apologize personally for how your exit was handled." I stayed silent. "We made decisions based on incomplete information. We didn't understand the scope of your contributions or the risks of proceeding without proper transition." "Incomplete information from where?" I asked. He hesitated. "Management recommendations that proved to be flawed." Translation: Dixon had pushed my termination, and leadership had trusted him without verification. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Acknowledgement that this wasn't procedural error. It was failure to value institutional knowledge. And commitment that it won't happen to others. Agreed. We're implementing knowledge retention protocols across operations. Your situation exposed systemic weaknesses we're addressing. "Put that in writing," I said. "Add it to the reinstatement terms." Done. Anything else? I thought about Derek, about Dixon, about Melissa sliding that thin folder across the table. Yes. I want authority to structure my own transition timeline and choose my successor when the time comes. On my terms. He didn't hesitate. "You'll have it." We finalized details over the next hour. Full reinstatement. Compensation adjustment. Formal acknowledgement of institutional value. Authority over transition planning. Everything documented. Signed. Binding. When I hung up, Caroline looked at me from the kitchen doorway. "You won." "No," I said quietly. "I just made them admit what they'd lost." The revised settlement arrived that afternoon. Formal. Thorough. Everything we'd discussed, plus elements I hadn't requested. Extended consulting retainer after eventual retirement. Equity consideration. Board-level acknowledgement in company communications. I reviewed every page with Bernard. He nodded slowly. "This is more than reinstatement. This is reputation repair." "It's accountability," I corrected. "They're admitting the mistake cost them more than they gained." "Are you accepting?" I thought about it. The anger had faded weeks ago, replaced by something colder. Clarity. I didn't need Meridian anymore. I could walk away, start fresh, consult independently. But accepting meant forcing systemic change. Meant protecting the next person in my position. Meant ensuring institutional knowledge was valued, not discarded. "Yes," I said finally. "But I'm not rushing back. They can wait while I finish reviewing their operations from outside." Bernard smiled. "You're making them earn it. They should have earned my loyalty 31 years ago. Now they're paying to rebuild it." I signed the agreement that evening, scanned it, and sent it back with a simple note. Accepted. Transition begins on my schedule. The response came within minutes. Relief poorly disguised as professionalism. Thank you. We look forward to working with you. They'd pushed me out in 10 minutes. Bringing me back was taking 6 weeks and costing them significantly more than severance. Some lessons are expensive. This one was overdue. My first day back felt surreal. Same building. Same parking spot. Different weight to it all. Security nodded as I walked in, my access card reactivated, green light glowing. People looked up as I passed. Not with pity this time. With something closer to respect. Or maybe caution. Amanda stopped me in the hallway. Thank God you're back. Everything's been falling apart. I know, I said simply. That's why I'm here. Dixon appeared outside his office. We made eye contact. He looked older, tired. Harlan. Welcome back. Can we talk? I followed him inside. Same office. Same desk. Different dynamic entirely. I owe you an apology, Dixon started. The termination was my recommendation. I thought Derek could handle the transition. I was wrong. I waited. I underestimated how much institutional knowledge you carried. How critical you were to daily operations. He rubbed his face. I cost the company millions and nearly destroyed our client relationships. Yes, I agreed. You did. He flinched. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild trust. I considered him. Dixon wasn't evil. He was ambitious, careless, and overconfident. He'd made a catastrophic mistake and was now facing consequences. Trust is earned, I said finally. Show me you've learned something, and we'll see. I left before he could respond. There was work to do, systems to stabilize, and damage to repair. The apology mattered, but results mattered more. The emergency operations meeting happened that afternoon. Senior leadership filled the conference room. Same room where I'd been terminated 6 weeks earlier. Different energy entirely. Patricia opened the meeting. We've asked Harlan back to discuss operational stabilization and long-term knowledge retention strategies. Eyes turned to me. I'd prepared a simple presentation. Nothing elaborate. Just facts. Current systems are failing because critical maintenance protocols were discontinued when I was terminated. Restoring stability requires 3 phases. Immediate stabilization, documentation update, and structural knowledge retention. I outlined each phase. Timelines. Resource needs. Risks if steps were skipped. The room stayed silent. When I finished, the board member who'd called me spoke. What do you need from us? Authority to implement without interference. Budget for proper documentation. And commitment that institutional knowledge will be valued going forward, not just in crisis. You have it, he said immediately. All of it. I nodded. Then we start tomorrow. As people filed out, Dixon lingered. That was impressive. That was necessary, I corrected. Impressive would have been preventing this crisis 6 weeks ago. He didn't argue. I gathered my materials and headed to my old office. Derek's nameplate was gone. My things had been returned, arranged carefully. Someone had even saved the photos. I sat down slowly, looking at 31 years of memories. They'd tried to erase me. Instead, they'd proven how deeply embedded I was. Sometimes the only way to show your value is to let people see what breaks without you. Derek appeared in my doorway the next morning. He looked exhausted, defensive. I know you're back to fix my mistakes. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit. He sat warily. I didn't know what I didn't know, he said. Nobody told me about background protocols or manual certifications. I thought I'd learned everything. You learned what was visible, I replied. But systems built over decades have invisible layers. Safeguards implemented because of problems that happened years before you arrived. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I was arrogant. I thought experience didn't matter as much as fresh perspective. I studied him. Derek wasn't malicious. He was young, confident, and given responsibility he wasn't ready for. Experience matters, I said. Not because older is better. Because knowledge compounds. Every fix teaches you something. Every failure builds judgment. You can't shortcut that with observation. Can I learn from you now? He asked. If you're willing to actually learn. Not just shadow. Actually dig deep, ask why, and understand there's no replacement for doing the work over time. He nodded seriously. I'm willing. We spent the next 3 hours going through systems I'd built. I explained not just how they worked, but why they existed. The problems they solved. The safeguards they contained. Derek took notes, asked questions, admitted confusion. By the end, he understood the depth of what he'd been handed without preparation. This should have taken years to transfer, he said. It will, I replied. We're just starting. Over the next 2 months, I stabilized operations systematically. Recertified failing protocols. Updated documentation. Trained Derek and 3 others properly. The work was exhausting but clarifying. Leadership watched carefully. The board member checked in weekly. How's it going? Slowly, I'd say. Properly. Client relationships stabilized. Performance metrics improved. The crisis faded into contained memory. During this time, I submitted my own documentation to leadership. A detailed report outlining how the crisis occurred, what it cost, and how to prevent similar failures. The language was direct, professional, and unflinching. Institutional knowledge must be valued before crisis forces recognition. Transitions require time, resources, and respect for complexity. Cutting costs by eliminating experienced personnel without proper knowledge transfer creates catastrophic risk. I didn't name Dixon directly. The facts did that for me. The report circulated among executives. 3 weeks later, new policies appeared. Mandatory transition timelines for senior departures. Knowledge documentation requirements. Retention incentives for long-term employees. Small changes, but meaningful. Meridian Industries was learning what losing me had cost. And more importantly, they were building systems to ensure it didn't happen again. I'd forced accountability not through anger, but through patient demonstration of what happens when experience is dismissed. Some victories are quiet. This one echoed through policy changes that would outlast me. 4 months after my reinstatement, Dixon requested a meeting. Private. Off calendar. He looked different. Thinner. Less certain. I'm leaving Meridian, he said without preamble. Board decided to restructure management. They're not renewing my contract. I didn't pretend surprise. Where are you going? Consulting. Maybe. I'm not sure yet. He paused. I came to ask if you'd be willing to provide a reference. The question hung between us. Dixon had recommended my termination, nearly destroyed the company, and was now asking me to help salvage his career. No, I said calmly. Why not? His voice rose slightly. Because references should be earned, I replied. You made a decision that cost this company millions and almost destroyed systems I built over decades. Those consequences are yours to carry. I apologized, he said. Apologies matter, but they don't erase impact. You're experiencing what happens when decisions have costs. That's not punishment. That's accountability. He stared at me for a long moment. You could help me. I could, I agreed. But I won't. Because the next company that considers hiring, you should know what happened here. Not from me. From your own explanation of what you learned. I stood, indicating the meeting was over. Good luck, Dixon. I genuinely hope you learn from this. He left without another word. I sat back down, feeling something close to closure. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just the quiet certainty that accountability had been served. Some people need full impact to understand their mistakes. Dixon was getting his. I'd gotten mine 6 weeks into forced retirement, sitting in my truck with a cardboard box. The difference was what we did with it. 6 months after my termination, I sat in my office reviewing transition plans. Not my exit. My succession. I was 58. Retirement wasn't immediate, but it was visible on the horizon. This time, it would happen on my terms. Properly planned. Fully documented. With a successor I'd chosen and trained thoroughly. Derek had grown significantly. He understood now what he hadn't before. That experience compounds. That systems have invisible depth. That respect for complexity matters. He'd become careful, methodical, humble. I was training him and 2 others, building redundancy into institutional knowledge. Meridian would survive my eventual departure because we were doing it right this time. Patricia stopped by late one afternoon. The board wanted me to thank you formally. You saved the company. I stabilized what broke, I corrected. The company saved itself by admitting the mistake. Still, you could have walked away. I shook my head. Walking away would have felt like losing. This felt like teaching a lesson that needed learning. She smiled slightly. Message received. After she left, I looked at the photos on my desk. 31 years. 1 catastrophic mistake. And a second chance built on proving value the hard way. They'd pushed me out, and the final settlement had triggered panic upstairs. Not because of legal clauses. Because they'd finally realized that some knowledge can't be replaced by cheaper alternatives. Experience matters. Documentation matters. And respect for the people who carry institutional memory matters most of all. I didn't burn the building down. I just walked away long enough to let them see what cracked without me. Then I came back and helped them rebuild it properly. Some victories aren't about revenge. They're about forcing systems to recognize what they'd taken for granted. That lesson would outlast me. And that felt like winning the right way.